Before we get started, are there any bill introductions? Senator Fasquedo had one. I know that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The RS number will be delivered later, but it's just to revoke driver's licenses.
Committee, any discussion or objections to introduction of that bill? Seeing none, that bill is introduced. Any other bill introductions? Seeing none, we'll move on to our agenda for today. Oh, did you have? Okay. I think we do have a couple of our senators on virtual. Senator Holscher and Senator Straub are both here virtual today. Could not be here. Okay. Considering that a number of states surrounding Kansas have legalized marijuana in various forms, we now have the benefit of a body of evidence available to us should we consider that path going forward. And for the next couple of days, what we decided to do is take a look at the ramifications other states have seen on public safety, public health, and welfare, and the impacts on the workplace and other effects that Kansas could expect if we take similar legislative action. And so that's the focus of the next 2 days here. And with that, I'd like to call on our first conferee, who is Dale Quigley, who's the Deputy Coordinator of the National Marijuana Initiative. Dale, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and honored guests, my name is Dale Quigley. I am the Deputy Coordinator for the National Marijuana Initiative for the HIDA program in the United States. We're a federally funded program. Unlike an enforcement initiative, our goal is to share information about emerging research and research finding and evidence-based facts concerning today's marijuana. This is a role that we think is actually fairly critical due to the fact that for decades, we've had so much misinformation and disinformation concerning this drug. We're trying to set it right with facts. In the allotted time that I've got, which is about 15 minutes with you, I want to provide you just an overview on a couple of things. We want to talk about the evolving pattern of legalization in this country, the increases in potency levels of THC that we're seeing in these products, and some of the other observed implications that we see post-legalization occur in the state. Nationally, we have been dealing with the legalization of marijuana since 1996. This is when California introduced Proposition 215, which allowed for the use of marijuana for medicinal purposes. Since that time, we now have 39 states and the District of Columbia that permit marijuana usage either for medicinal or recreational purposes. While the push toward legalization has continued to gain momentum, there's one factor that stands out to us. In all of this time, in nearly 30 years of legalization, we have yet to develop one singular standard that's globally accepted as being effective for controlling regulation and oversight, for minimizing the issues of harms to public health and public safety, and to controlling the increasing levels of THC that were in these products. So to understand where we're at today, we need to look back. We're going to look back 4 decades to 1979. At that time, then chairperson for the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, NORML, Mr. Keith Straub, made a telling statement during an interview with the Emory Wheel newspaper. The question was posed to him, and I quote, "How is NORML utilizing the issue of marijuana treatment of chemotherapy patients?" Mr. Straub replied, quote, "We're trying to get marijuana reclassified medically. If we do that, comma, parentheses, and we'll do it in at least 20 states this year alone for chemotherapy patients, and parentheses, we'll be using the issue as a red herring to give marijuana a good name. The colloquial dated term red herring refers to something that's being used or intended to be used to distract or mislead. Since the time of Prop 215 until now, we see several distinct patterns associated with the movement toward legalization. In many states, the initial move may be to decriminalize marijuana. This is to reduce the status of the offense to a misdemeanor or a petty offense, or take it from a petty offense down to a civil infraction. And generally, these surround issues of personal usage or possession of small amounts. The effect this has of removing this from the criminal justice system is it removes any accountability for an individual's actions. And by replacing it with a civil remedy such as a fine, and in many cases, the fine is less than that what you get in a traffic citation. The step also has the effect of destigmatizing and normalizing marijuana in public perception. This public acceptance paves the way toward that initial push for a state to go to legalization for medical use. So, for first key step for a state is adopt a medical use program. This is despite the fact that back then, as it is now, marijuana still remains a Scheduled I substance in this country. which means by definition, it has no accepted medical use, and it has high potential for abuse. Professional medical organizations such as the American Medical Association, American Academy of Pediatrics, American Academy of Family Physicians, and others, while supporting the call for more research into marijuana, none of them have adopted or endorsed marijuana as a therapeutic agent which is proven to be safe or effective. Once a medical model is in place, the next transition is go to commercial adult use sales to those over 21. And this is primarily for economic reasons. The money is not in medical. The money is in commercial adult sales. With the medical sale model, you're appealing to a very small segment of the population, those with the medical card. Limited access to buyers means limited profit potential. But if we open it up to something based on an age threshold, like we have now with alcohol and tobacco, we expand that potential to a much larger market to appeal to sales. You know, it's important to note that while both of these models address the issue of sale of marijuana, the use of marijuana, the scope and scale of the two issues, medical versus a commercial adult use, are completely different, and they offer unique and significant challenges to a state in trying to monitor, regulate, and control. Over the last 27 years, we've had medical marijuana, then commercial adult use marijuana, and one of the things that's changed has been the time that it takes for a state to go from a medical model to transition to a commercial adult model. I'm not sure the slides are up, apparently not. We've got 3 periods, 1996 to 1999. This is early medical. This is pre-Y2K, all right? From 2000 to 2012 is the next era, and that's really where the only game in town was medical marijuana. And it wasn't until we get past 2008, 2009 that we start hearing discussions about shifting to a commercial adult use model. 2013 to current, this is the hybrid. This is the blend of medical models available and commercial adult use. As each era has progressed, the push toward commercial adult use is becoming faster and faster than the era prior to it. Most recently, our neighbors to the north in South Dakota, they were able to pass both a medical bill and an adult use bill on the same election cycle. However, this violated the state election policies. In doing so, it was challenged and adult use was repealed. It came back around again in November of 22, where it was placed before the voters, and this time where it had initially passed 4 years prior, this time it failed. The push toward rapid mobilization from medical to commercial use is not the only increase that we have seen. During the same time, the potency levels of tetrahydrocannabinol, THC, the part of that plant that gets you high, have continued, and many products have increased significantly. The fact is, they've increased to record levels that we have never seen in this country before. We don't fully understand what these highly potent products mean. We don't understand the research behind it yet because it is evolving so quick, research is lagging behind. Current research does demonstrate that there is an upward shift in policy potency as legalization has moved forward. No slides? Okay.
Sean, I think we're on slide number 4, I think.
3, sir.
On 3, okay.
There we go. Okay.
And again, folks who are watching online, by the way, sorry to interrupt.
No problem.
You can go to the Kansas Legislature, ks.gov website, look for the committees, and then navigate to the federal and state committee on the Senate side, and then the testimony. You click on the box, it'll have the date, and these will be available to you, all of the testimony today. Sorry about that. Go right ahead.
Thank you, Senator. So current research from 2020 demonstrates this upward shift in potency as legalization gained momentum. Prior to 1996, the general potency level for raw flower, commonly known as bud, was right around the 4% level. Concentrate, as we see on the far left-hand side of that other scale, concentrates around the 10% level. However, as time and legalization efforts have progressed, so have the potency levels in these same products. Since the time this research was released, the potency levels that we have for these products in the commercial marketplace right now have more than doubled. I'm personally aware of THC contents for raw flower that are being advertised and sold between 30 and 40% potency level of THC. Concentrates are being advertised and sold from 70 to 80% plus concentrations of THC. There's even products on the market now that are commonly being advertised at 90+% potency of THC. When we look to Colorado, my home state, Kansas is the nearest neighbor with a long-term experience for both medical and adult markets. If you go to slide number 4 for me, please. There we go. What we do is we take a look at the market preference by share. And this is for the medical market as the top row of pie charts, the recreational market, the commercial adult use markets down below. Since 2014, we have seen a decrease in both medical and commercial adult use markets for the demand for raw flower. It's gone down by 21 to 33%. What's offsetting that decrease is the increase of demand for the more potent forms of concentrates that are out there. Those have increased between 114 and 164% respectively. Let's go to slide 5 for a second, please. When we overlay the years that it takes to go from medical to commercial adult use, and we combine that with the increase of potencies, the trend lines become pretty obvious. As time has progressed, we've seen the time from year to year, from era to era, to go from medical to commercial adult use decrease. At the same time, thank you, sir. At the same time, we've seen the potency levels. This first graph that we see is for raw marijuana, the smokable form. This one, I'll tell you what, I'll just give it. There we go. There we go. This is for potency for concentrates. We can see that these keep on the increase. And the sad thing is that even though the trend line becomes obvious, as time has progressed, you know, what we're stuck with is absent of any limitations in potency of products or thresholds or caps to THC levels, we understand that the market and the industry is going to produce what the public is demanding, despite the ever-growing body of evidence about the injuries and harms related back to high-potency THC products. When considering the issue of legalization, it's incumbent on everyone to look at the downstream effects that legalization can have on a state and its people. Recent and emerging research supports that increased prevalence of marijuana in our society increases risk to adverse public health issues, a greater role in incidents of drug-impaired driving and fatal crashes, and even consequences just from its use, to include the necessity to seek either medical treatment or advice because of toxicity levels from smoking or consuming these high-potency products. And most recently, and as a grandfather, the significant increases that we're seeing in unintentional pediatric exposure cases stemming from consumption of cannabis-based edible products by groups of ages 6 and under, less than 6 years of age. Now, on a positive note, when I'm asked the question, does anything good come out of the legalization of marijuana? I can honestly say yes. And specifically, it's this. People are asking better questions, and they're demanding better answers, not answers that, you know, are based in a rhetoric or a canned response, but they're looking for evidence-based information. You know, we have heard over the last 3 years in dealing with the pandemic, follow the science, and we're finding that people want to know the facts behind what is going on with today's marijuana. We've got more research being done now than we have ever had before, especially on the high potency issues. And we're gaining a better understanding of the cannabis plant, its cannabinoids, the pharmacokinetics, how it moves through our body, the pharmacodynamics, how it affects our body. We're getting a better insight to that than we've ever known. A good example of this, Epidiolex. Epidiolex is a drug that was formulated directly from CBD, cannabidiol, from the plant. It's one of nearly 100 plus cannabinoids found in the plant. This formulation underwent what we normally see happen with a creation of a new pharmaceutical agent in this country. It was researched extensively. It underwent protracted clinical trials and evaluation, all to gain an understanding of how do we consistently produce this product and how do we reduce the risk to a patient so they get the maximum benefit. And like all new drugs seeking medication for approval, the goal was to prove the formulation was safe and effective. Epidiolex, if you're not aware, is a drug that's used to treat two very specific neurospastic disorders in pediatric patients suffering from seizures. Once the Food and Drug Administration gave its approval for use, it was initially classified as a Schedule V controlled substance, the bottom of the controlled substance layers. 2 years later, because of the information that's coming in, the observations of how it's being applied in the real world, it was taken out of the scheduled substance and was classified down for prescription only. Now, the drug still does pose some risk, okay? The hepattic functions, the impact to the liver, it causes some problems. But this is a case that even though we have the known hazards and known benefits, this is now a case where a clinical understanding of the risk and rewards that a doctor can use to assess, is this worth giving to a patient? Is the risk worth the reward on this one? This is a prime example of how medicine is researched, created, and distributed as a therapeutic agent in this country. Simply to call something medical by putting that label in front of it, without the science, the data, and the proof behind it, that falls way short of this standard. We're at third base heading for home. When Colorado legalized marijuana in 2000 for medical use, it was by means of a state constitutional amendment, Amendment 20, and that passed by a majority of 54%. At the time that we passed that, guys, we did not have the body of knowledge, the research, and the data that we have now. By the same token, we didn't have the potency of the products in the marketplace that we have now. Those evolved over time. What we did have, frankly, was a great deal of apathy. We had a great deal of confusion and lack of understanding of the law. And a lot of that was based on, it's just weed. And that was probably the wrong perspective to take on this. 12 years later comes Amendment 64, commercial adult use. You'll sometimes hear it referred to as recreational use. This, too, by a very small margin, 54% passed. But in the 12 years, we saw some interesting things take place. The independent business owners who opened up the dispensaries are hoping making big profits.
Hey, Dale, probably need to wrap it up here so we can get to everybody else.
You got it, sir.
Thank you, sir.
They saturated the market, saturating it to the point where we saw big industrial commercial marijuana come in and start eating up the bottom stuff. We saw a reduction in price per gram. In 14, what was selling for $14, $15 a gram is now selling for $3.76. Marijuana that was selling for medical purposes at $6 a gram in 14 is now going for $6. You know, when we take a look at this, we have to understand that there's so many ancillary issues and costs associated to legalization. There's issues of healthcare, homelessness, social justice, and budgets. To date, I am not aware of a single data source that can tell me for a fact, when we look at this on a broad scale, whether Colorado is in the red or the black when it comes to legalization. Mr. Chairman, in closing, I would encourage this body, and I'd encourage the people of Kansas, educate yourself on the current nature of marijuana in this country. And I'd also encourage you to stay away from the extremes and arguments. Stay away from the reefer madness arguments and stay away from the arguments over here of the red herring arguments. You know, it's easy to say that, but let's be honest. When you challenge those arguments, a lot of them fall short in being able to prove validity, giving evidence of the fact that, you know, the old adage, let no one deceive you with empty words. Rather, seek the truth from valid science. Seek it from evidence-based research. Make your own assessment using known facts of potential risk and consequences. Then make the assessment with an informed choice in deciding what's best for Kansas and what's best for its people. Just to circle back in closing, when it comes to the amount of misinformation and disinformation surrounding marijuana that we've heard for years, I want to leave you in the words of Mark Twain. What gets us into trouble is not what we don't know, it's what we know for sure. That just ain't so. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for your time and attention today. I'll yield back the remainder of my time to the floor for questions.
Thank you, Dale, and we will hold for questions till the end. That's why I wanted to get try to get everybody in here so we have time for questions. Thank you, Dale. Appreciate it very much. Next up, we have Joe McGuire, who's the Executive Director of the National Drug and Alcohol Screening Association. Joe, welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to you and the committee for letting me address you today. I'm going to go back a little bit in history for just a minute, something that I think is pretty relevant to today. On January 4th, 1987, commuters and families returning from their holiday vacations boarded a train in Washington, D.C., headed toward Boston. And it was a cold, gray winter afternoon. I remember it well. Some of you will remember seeing this on your television screens. During the time that they were boarding up and getting ready to head out, an engineer and his brakeman on another railway company decided to smoke marijuana at the train depot before they headed out. And remember, this is 1987, so compared to today's potencies, we would consider this a pretty low potency. No way it was over 10% in 1987. They left the station and missing multiple warning signals all along the way telling them that they were about to collide with a passenger train. They were running light, which means empty cars. They crashed at 1:30 in the afternoon, injuring 164 passengers and killing 16, to include the engineer and many women and children on the passenger train. It was the worst commercial rail fatality in the U.S. that we had had in our modern history. And because of this tragedy, the workplace drug testing rules for the United States Department of Transportation were implemented. To this day, every safety-sensitive employee undergoes routine drug testing in order to protect the traveling public. Now, this testing program has become the gold standard worldwide. I work with these rules and regulations and even help other countries to implement similar programs. We also see that employers in non-DOT, so it's considered DOT drug testing rules, so non-DOT employers also adopt these practices in order to prevent incidents and tragedies. And this program encourages those with violations to seek recovery and return to work in a safe and healthy manner. In that time, since we've implemented these rules in the early 1990s, we've proven that employees participating in a mandatory drug testing program have 50% less drug use than those who do not. And here we are now, 35 years later, we've completely forgotten how marijuana can detrimentally impact safety, and we're now under intense pressure to remove THC from routine drug test panels in order to protect the employee's right to use a Schedule I drug. In 2013, I was appointed to serve on the governor's task force to implement the regulatory framework for Amendment 64, which, as you well know, legalized adult use recreational marijuana in our state. My role was to protect employers' rights to a safe and drug-free workplace. Within the first 10 minutes of committee introductions, I was told by a prominent member of the Cannabis Council, which is their legal and lobby group, that I could shut my mouth. I was irrelevant to the conversation. Drug testing was going away, and they were not going to hear anything from me. And over the next several months, they worked very, very hard to shut down employers' rights to test in the state of Colorado. Now, they lost that battle at that time, but they continue to this day to introduce bill after bill after bill to stop employer rights to safe and drug-free workplaces in the state of Colorado. What was so shocking to me on that day was that throughout the debate session prior to the vote, the cannabis lobby had said repeatedly to the voters, we believe in employers' rights. We will not touch workplace. Yes, we want safety, and so you don't ever have to worry about that. And then, less than 30 days later, they're saying, no, we're going to get rid of it. We had to say what we had to say to get this passed. That's the insidiousness of what you're dealing with. And so since that time, not only has there been a mission to reduce the rights of employers in our state, but every single state that has legalized after Colorado, Washington, and Oregon in 2012 has now had some type of limitation or restriction on employers' rights. They even will call drug testing discriminatory. Some states don't allow pre-employment testing anymore. In January of 2024, California will outlaw testing for THC unless it is a reasonable cause or an egregious post-accident where impairment can be proven. So while Colorado is still trying to hold on to the boundary, we are just facing a battle nationwide with employers being able to continue to test for this drug that has no bearing on a safe work environment. So since 1988, Quest Diagnostics has published the annual drug testing index, revealing insights into patterns of drug use amongst the American workforce. These are based on positive drug test results for tens of millions of drug tests. There's 10 million a year, so they've been doing this for decades. This is for DOT and non-DOT. And what they have found is that after decades of downward trends in all illicit drug use by employees across this nation, we've now seen alarming spikes going up year over year since 2013, when Colorado, Washington, and Oregon changed their laws. And realize it's not only THC positivity that's going up, it's all illicit drugs. Last year, the report said this is the highest level in 2 decades. And in fact, one thing that really scares me, remember the story I just told you about the Chase Conrail's Maryland train crash? Post-accident positivity is going up at a faster rate than pre-employment positivity in drug tests. Last year was 63% increase for marijuana positives in post-accident alone. So the data, I supplied you with the links to these data charts. You can look at them state by state, and you can see where states that have gone into, whether it's medical or recreational, their THC numbers are just off the charts, followed by amphetamines and cocaine. So finally, the National Council on Alcoholism and Drug Dependence estimates that employee substance use disorders cost employers upwards of $80 billion a year annually. These losses stem from lost productivity, accidents, injuries, absenteeism, employee turnover, healthcare expenses, disability, and workers' compensation. We are saddling America's workforce, and particularly our small business owners, with inescapable liabilities that prevent them not only from succeeding in their business endeavors, but from protecting their employees, customers, and the public from harm. Yet state after state is succumbing to the cannabis lobby's bullying tactics and supplying them with a false narrative and massive misinformation disregarding the known facts of safety programs in order to pad their own pockets. One thing that we hear regularly is it's okay, we'll come up with an impairment test. This applies to workplace and roadside. There's no such thing as an impairment test for marijuana. And in my industry, toxicologists across this nation agree we will never have such a thing. So we can talk about that later in the Q&A if you like. Should your state venture down this slippery slope of compromise, you'll soon find that the promise of tax revenue has many associated costs, one of which is already shrinking workforce, which we're dealing with now. Given the virtual carte blanche to report to work stoned, as long as they didn't use the drug while on work property, some can actually use at work if they have a medical marijuana card. They may be accommodated. It just depends on what an employer decides to do and what your state allows. This really comes down to how far will our policymakers go to protect the drug. Regardless, make no mistake that employers of all business sectors and sizes are intimidated, bullied, and threatened, and they do turn a blind eye to substance use, simply choosing to avoid the headache, and they end up absorbing the cost. The cannabis lobby often claims that by my representing the drug and alcohol testing means I am here to protect financial interests of my own. But I can promise you this is not a profession that builds wealth. It's a profession driven by the heart. For people who are passionate to protect others, most of them having dealt with the ravages of substance addiction in their own home. We want to see people come home safely at the end of every workday. Most of us have a personal story, and we try to make it worthwhile and meaningful through our jobs. We want you to consider that your responsibility to protect public safety is not prioritized where marijuana becomes more important and carries more value than human life. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. And again, we'll hold for questions still after all conferees. Next up is Brian Scherber, who's the Deputy Director of Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics. Hopefully I didn't butcher your name, Brian.
Yes, sir, that's good.
Close enough?
Yes, sir.
Very good. Thank you, Brian.
So thank you very much, committee members, for having me here. I will tell you that I'm not a paid advocate to be here. It's a little bit like Groundhog Day. I've heard this stuff before. I assume there's promises of revenue and things with the medicinal benefits of Oklahoma. I'll tell you, the way we did in Oklahoma was by referendum, where we had a lot of out-of-state money that came in. The process is by gathering votes. The advocacy group puts a paragraph on the ballot it may encompass 7 single-space pages, and we had these promises. And I will tell you that this issue, like most, that life is rarely a zero-sum game. There are no solutions. There are options with consequences. And every action we take oftentimes has a reaction to it. I'm here to talk about how that's impacted Oklahoma. Now, again, it was Media Blitz put out there that a false binary choice between children having pediatric seizures and legalizing marijuana. Or it might be that it is the opioid. We have an opioid epidemic. Don't let a crisis go to waste. So then we have people that say, of course, it wouldn't just be a physician, it'd be a combat vet. It's a technique we use in persuasion. They teach at trial schools. Aristotle talked about ethos, pathos, and logos, sympathy, logic, and ethics as ways to persuade, and that's why you capture that in doing that. Now, again, that's what we saw. Now, again, I think to sometimes unpack this, you can say a lot of things are medicinal, has a medicinal impact, okay? You can say something like that, look, if you bang morphine, mainline it, you're going to feel better, but you'll never prescribe it for depression. You could say it's medicinal because of the counter effects of that. Alcohol has a history, a history of actually being used as an anesthetic in wartime, field amputations. But my dad has a knee replacement. We don't give him enough bourbon to actually do the surgery. Is because there's a dose-response relationship. There has to be enough to do that. And so, look, what they're chasing, let's just be honest, what they're chasing with this effort decades ago to recast marijuana as a medicine, which we don't even talk about in Oklahoma anymore. We're past that, and even the advocates. But they're chasing THC, tetrahydrocannabinol. When the extracts and the edibles of all the cannabinoids, it's the THC. THC is a Schedule 3. It's kind of my world in working at the Bureau. And you can get a prescription for THC. It's called Marinol, Dronabinol, 2.5 milligram tablets. And you'll see how that relates to what we have as the medicine in Oklahoma. Again, it was pushed out there with this false binary choice. We don't even talk about that. I have in my written testimony submitted the position statements, not teetotalers, not cops. Look at the scientists and what they say about the use of artisanal cannabis to children treating epilepsy. And you'll see their positions on that. And just so we're clear, these efforts, whether it's by popular vote or here, this is the first time in history we've bypassed the FDA approval process and sought to make a medication with the political process. There's a reason for that, because marijuana has failed at the scientific level. So let's talk about basically what's happened in Oklahoma, kind of the post-legalization. And when I've been at the Bureau, I've been as a prosecutor, a narcotics agent, an agency attorney. I came back to the Bureau about a year ago, been about a year as a deputy director, been the general counsel. Marijuana was illegal when I left and went back to a DA's office. And when I came back, and it is crippling to my agency. I'm sure you're going to have all these things about the money you'll make. That's a little technique been going way back. That the taxes, let's tax it and get people rehab. All these kind of free up law enforcement, and you'll see those things. Now again, and I've heard this. Oh, the Oklahoma's law is revenue neutral or revenue positive. Well, they're talking about what the money that goes to the Oklahoma Medical Marijuana Authority and what they do. I have 40 agents that I have to work, and we have multiple vacancies now to deal with the black market marijuana. And there's money behind it, as there always is. With law firms, I had lawyers up in a corner of the state on a temporary restraining order to let someone operate when the straw owner turned in the registration. And we have to deal with that kind of things, those kind of things constantly. So we have, right now in Oklahoma, we have 2.5 times the marijuana farms than retail dispensaries. And we have a lot of retail dispensaries. California is 20 times our population, and we have 3.5 times, 3.4 times the dispensaries, which means our per capita concentration is 34 times that of California, who's been in the weed game since the mid-90s. And we have 3.5 times. In what economic model can there be more wholesale farms than retail outlets? But I'll tell you what's happening in Oklahoma. We did a white paper with 2 modest assumptions, that every single cardholder smokes a joint each and every day. At the study showed the size of a joint. And if every farm produced a mere 1,000 pounds, and they will leave 1,400 pounds in a trailer when they walk away from it. Well, that's each of 17,000 pounds. But those 2 modest assumptions and our cardholder demand, and statistically, about cannabis users, about 1 in 5 smokes daily. But assume every single one smokes a joint every day. Our cardholder demand is met with 1.2% of our gross. Sounds like crazy hyperbole. I will tell you that's exactly consistent with the intel of what we have. We've done 2 wiretaps, both in foreign languages. When we talk about challenges, so when I've got a wiretap in Fujianese and a wiretap in Cantonese, and to translate that. And that's just the operation. I go to rural Oklahoma, have translators for the people that are there in doing that. But in both of those 30-day wiretaps, each involved multiple grows. Not a single, not once did they dispense and take marijuana, send it to a lab, and go to a retail outlet processor in Oklahoma. Not once. That's consistent with the intel that we've seen and the explosion of black market. Now, again, they'll probably say, and what even the advocates don't say Oklahoma's working very well now. And so it's just basically like, well, it wasn't done right. They're probably going to say, well, we want to be Oklahoma because it's pretty bad down there. And so they'll probably say, well, let's do it differently. And it reminds me of people who support communist regimes and that support socialism. It's like, well, Cuba just wasn't done right because everyone that's been done so far has been a failure. And they're probably going to say, well, let's do it different than Oklahoma. And now they're saying we just need more regulation. There's a false notion with any criminal justice reform measure, even by good-hearted people. That is, criminals follow the law. Turns out they don't. We made a residency requirement in Oklahoma. Just Oklahoma is tired of the out-of-state international interests coming in. The 12 separate international criminal syndicates we know are operating in Oklahoma right now from 3 continents. So we made a residency requirement. Overnight, there sprung up an industry of straw owners where you pay people to be the owner on paper. We have very low-income Oklahomans that on paper own 299 marijuana farms. Now, they've since turned those in with the investigations. There have been lawyers that have been indicted for orchestrating these schemes. But again, crime, I've been in the public safety game 26 years. Crime's like a virus. It morphs to thrive in its environment, period. That's why we have high-grade weed. California made it legal in the 90s. They said, we'll give you a number of plants. They said, by the plants you say, they put all their time and energy into making super weed, where flower marijuana now is 7 times more potent than it was when I started in 1996 because of doing that. So how's it affected other things? Well, has it had downstream effects? What about the public? Again, there's options and consequences. It would be nice you let people out of prison and they didn't hurt other people. It turns out they do. It'd be nice if you could actually increase the supply of marijuana in Oklahoma and it didn't impact children. What we've seen is pediatric overdoses. The Colorado Rocky Mountain Hider Report made a book by Dr. Kevin Sabet about the impacts of marijuana legalization. Their 0 to 5 pediatric overdoses tripled after legalization. We averaged 5 a year in Oklahoma prior to legalization. Last year we had 269, a 53-fold increase. Although I might not agree with it, I can at least respect people that would say, you know, look, it's the cost of freedom. Here's the deal. We're going to do this. We're going to legalize it, and we don't let kids have it, but that's what you see. Our medicine, remember that the medicine is gummy worms. I don't know if you go to, you know, when you go and get blood pressure medication or perhaps any kind of medication, it's actually packaged in colorful gummy worms. Gummy worms, 500 milligrams. Remember that 2.5 milligram Marinol we had? What that is, and it's a recommended daily dose, 2 a day, 5 milligrams a day. Quick math, that 500 milligram gummy sold as medicine in the packaging turns out to be 100 days worth of the therapeutic use of tetrahydrocannabinol in the regulated form. Other downstream crimes we've had, and I've got those cited in there. We've had a quadruple homicide of someone wanting to get money at one of our rural marijuana grows. I had this testimony draft done last week, and then Friday, an investigation my agency did with the Attorney General's office. We had a marijuana farm that had sex trafficking, human trafficking, labor trafficking is huge in these. Look like third world nations, these marijuana farms. Open sewage running through there. We've never had ketamine in my whole career. I've been in the dope game 26 years in Oklahoma. Ketamine's everywhere to supply the international people that are here. We have a sub-ketamine industry that is there. And I don't know a single, not one peace officer prosecutor that says that legalization in Oklahoma has reduced crime. As a consensus among them, it has had a dramatic increase in crime. We did a podcast yesterday to my agency with multiple agency heads and sheriffs talking about the huge effect. And when the public officials, through vote or whatever, make something legal, that's what the American Society of Addictive Medicine calls the perceived threat. One of the sheriffs was lamenting yesterday. I go to talk to the grade schools, like, how can you say it's dangerous? So there's billboards everywhere advocating it. Because what happens is when you make a huge supply, that's just basic economics, not criminals, then there's going to be an effort to target the young daily user to increase use rates. Last thing I'll say, I mentioned as an addendum to Steve Kunzweiler, the DA of Tulsa County. I told him that he heard I was coming. He said, I want you to tell any single person there, media member, legislator, contact me. And he said, and he actually said, you can put my personal cell phone up. I will tell them exactly how the legalization is made. Every promise they made has not come true, and how it has impacted the community he's sworn to protect. So with that, I'll yield, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. And again, we'll open for questions here after our final conferee of the day, which is Steve Howe, our Johnson County District Attorney. Steve, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee, and thank you for the opportunity to speak on this important public safety and public health issue. As a prosecutor of over 30 years, I deal with facts and evidence and making arguments and taking a position. I don't deal with fiction and anecdotal stories, and so that's why I'm weighing in opposition of any kind of legislation supporting medical marijuana or legalization, because the facts are very compelling. You're going to hear from people tomorrow about the medical community, and in my written testimony, you see every single large agency or group from the medical community is weighing against this. And it's based on facts, and it's based on the negative consequences for people's health. And so I guess after COVID and everything, I guess some of us did question the medical community, but by and large, don't we agree with our doctors when they prescribe something to us and they tell us this is what you need to do? So why should we ignore the entire medical community and their view on this important public health issue? And I agree with Mr. Serber, which is, why are we treating this drug any different than all the other drugs that go through the FDA? And what the medical community and the United States Department of Health have said, there needs to be more studies, more clinical trials to determine the true impact, and as indicated in previous testimony, what are the clinical doses that would be acceptable? We don't have any of that. And the states who have passed these laws have not done those things, and that's why you have a situation like Mr. Serber indicated, putting the people of Oklahoma at risk. You know, one of the things I always ask myself is when we take a position on something is what societal ail or need are we trying to solve here? And I'd ask that each and every one of you ask that same question. What need for Kansans are we trying to solve by passing legislation allowing for medical marijuana or legalization? What world ail, what problems are we solving? A lot of the proponents say, well, there's medical purposes. And you've heard a little bit about seizures. You're going to hear more about it. I have a personal story. I have a niece who had horrible seizures. She was in Colorado. She took, and we shouldn't use medical marijuana because it's not marijuana. It's not, there's no THC in it. She didn't get high from taking it. It's the other ingredients, I will phrase it, that are in that drug that she took for her seizures. It didn't work, so she stopped taking it. But this whole idea that there's not other options available also, I think, belies the truth. You know, I'm on the borders with Missouri, and when they passed their law this last year, what was really offensive to me was they used veterans in their ads about passing legalization of marijuana. I have the first veterans treatment court in the state of Kansas, and so we participate in treating people who have committed violations of the law, who have PTSD, and I will tell you, there's no way that the medical providers, the VA, or anybody else is going to prescribe marijuana to treat somebody with PTSD. That is a false narrative, and it's offensive to use veterans to be the selling point for this type of legalization or medical marijuana. The last thing you want a person to do who's suffering from PTSD is to get them high. I mean, that's just flies in the face of all logic in the medical community in large. The other thing is, you know, cigarettes, we've basically said how horrible cigarettes are. But we have no problem with unfiltered marijuana cigarettes, people smoking those. The vaping, which is horrible for your lungs. There's now a national advertisement campaign about vaping. Most of those THC products come from vaping, but we just ignore the health consequences of these types of things because of the greater good, which we've never been able to define how that makes our society a better place. We talk about crime rates, and I looked at Colorado. I looked at Oklahoma. It doesn't solve crime rates. I'm on the border state, so I have Kansas City, Missouri on the other side of my state line. And guess what, folks? They made it medical marijuana. Did the crime rate go down? No. Do we expect now that they've legalized it that the crime rate in Kansas City, Missouri is going to go down? No. In fact, guess what happened? They had the 3 highest murder rates in the history of Kansas City, Missouri, despite having medical marijuana. So this whole idea of if we legalize it, we reduce crime is a false premise. I have 10 juveniles in my detention center charged with felony murder for killing people over a bag of weed. And so you think, well, maybe if we legalize it, we don't have that problem. Well, you know what? If you look at the data, again, evidence from Oklahoma, Colorado, Missouri, that's not what's going to happen, folks. The black market will still reign. You know what? We're all consumers, right? If I want to pay $50 for the legal marijuana or I can pay $30 for the black market, what are we going to do? It's like, why do we go to Walmart, right? Because it's cheaper. And so that's what the black market does. And so the drug rips that we have will not go away by legalizing it. And it's really kind of shocking. It's not meth, it's not fentanyl, it's not heroin, that people are killing each other over its marijuana. The other thing is, remember when we used to rail about all the doctors, the pill doctors giving out Oxy for all the various reasons, and how can we shut this down because of that? Well, now we're going to create weed doctors that can prescribe it for any rhyme or reason. In Missouri, there's no restrictions, despite what the medical community says, about you getting an ability to have medical marijuana. And I hearken back, I'm a big Clint Eastwood, so I love the movie Outlaw Josie Wales, right? And there was a snake oil salesman, and at one point he had the stuff he was selling, and the Indian walked up to him and said, so what is it, what can it do? And he says, just about anything. And that's what we got. It's like when you get medical marijuana, basically people are selling it as they can do anything for anybody. And that type of and I just like to use those kind of analogies because that's what we see when we pass these laws. The last thing I want to talk about is this premise that we need to legalize it because we got to stop putting people in jail for possessing marijuana. That's another false premise. There's no prosecutors in the state of Kansas putting people away in jail for a joint. That just isn't happening. I'll tell you why. Because you passed a number of laws, like Senate Bill 123, to treat people with addictions. That's the whole premise. And prosecutors across the state realize that what we want to do is target dealers, not users. And so the whole thing that we're aiming at is let's get the addicts, let's get them treatment and get them so they can be better and not put their lives at risk. And whether it's marijuana, heroin, methamphetamine, that is what we're doing. So we give diversion, we give other pretrial options to people, but we don't put people in prison. We don't put people in jail for just possessing a joint. And so, again, that other push that the proponents go with is like we need to stop putting people and incarcerate them for marijuana is a false premise here in the state of Kansas. In closing, this should be about public health and public safety. And I ask you to look at those two things and what the people who work in those areas say about what the proponents want. And when you look at the true facts, not anecdotal stories, not fiction, but the evidence that'll be portrayed to you both today and tomorrow, it's going to be pretty compelling that, number one, we shouldn't legalize it, and number two, before we do medical marijuana, how about we have some clinical studies and evidence from the trusted people in the medical community to support how we go about doing that? And that is the smart way to approach this. Do we want to be the next Oklahoma? And I'm sorry, Mr. Serber, for naming you out, but do we want to be the next Oklahoma? And I think the fact that we've taken our time in the state of Kansas doesn't make us wrong. Just because other states have gone off the cliff doesn't make them right. And I think that's the thing that I always remind ourselves is like, you know, being a knee-jerk reaction and doing what other people do does not mean it's the right decision. And so I ask each and every one of you to do the right thing for your constituents, for the people of state of Kansas. And I think when you look at all the evidence that's going to be presented to you over the next 2 days, you're going to find compelling evidence that this is not the right time or the right way to help the people of the state of Kansas. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, committee, I'm going to open it up to questions here. We've got time before the end of the bottom of the hour, and any committee questions for any of our conferees? Senator Fasquedo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This question can be for either Steve, the Johnson County District Attorney, or for Dale. So, you know, I've heard both sides of this over the years since 2018. This committee has heard some, or legislation has been introduced, and so the majority of the people that I hear from, and I'll go back, I want to thank the chairman for allowing these informational hearings so we can get more information from both sides. And but the ones that I hear from, they mention the pain. My constituents mention the pain that they're in. Even former or Representative Gail Finney, who recently passed away of lupus, introduced one of the first pieces of legislation. So what is the suggestion, because your ending statement you mentioned from the medical and health aspect, so what do we do to relieve that pain for those who don't want to use other harmful drugs, morphine that kind of just puts you under, you know? So what can we really do to address the pain aspect of this?
You know, Senator, I am sympathetic for people who go through those situations. And there are other drugs available for pain management and palliative care. And I'm not saying that there isn't a point in time where this would be a proper approach, giving somebody an alternative in a palliative care situation, because I've had family members go through that, and it's tough, and I get it. But shouldn't we do it with our eyes wide open and know what all the effects are? And, you know, one of the things I think we need to do is put pressure on the federal government, like, come on, FDA, do the studies, get the clinical trials done, so we can make an educated decision from each of the states about what's best for our people. And I think perhaps that's the approach we need to take, is a more direct approach with our federal government, so we can get FDA approval and we can have these types of drugs that give other options. And I'm not here to say that that's not a reasonable option, but they're far and few between. And the problem is, regulation-wise, when you try to construct a law to allow for this, it ends up blowing up and you open the Pandora's box and then it gets abused. And it's unfortunate, because I do think there are some instances where it would be appropriate, but unfortunately then, again, the Pandora's box opens and then everybody abuses those options.
Thank you. Senator Holscher, then Senator Clues.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Holscher,
Appreciate
are you
it.
there?
Oop. Do you hear me?
Barely. Sean, can you turn her up a little bit? I can't hear her very well. Okay, I think we've got you now.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. My question is for Brian. Excuse me. And I very much agree with what Brian was saying, that there are lots of issues with the Oklahoma program. Since it was by referendum, guardrails weren't set in place and a lack of policing the program. And I'm curious, based upon the information you shared, do you have any statistics in regard to what products sell the most, since patients use a lot of tinctures, topicals, and edibles?
No, one of the things that was in there was a certain confidentiality in terms of the reporting and patient things that go through there. So we have the ability to inspect and get the records from dispensaries. That's at the dispensary level. I'll tell you, really, we underestimated our fears. We're not to the point of even worrying about dispensaries right now and the nuances of doing the law. The black market massive grows we're having are what's important. There's recently implemented what we call the seed to sale tracking system. Again, that would be good if it was followed. There's just ways where they tag the plants, they tag the ones in the front, they reuse them, and the records are oftentimes not in order. We go there and check to see what the records are. We've had things like, we lost it all because of a hurricane in Oklahoma. That's been one of the reasons that's been given. And so, again, I don't have that, ma'am, and there's, because we don't have two things. We don't have a way to collect that, a repository for that information, and that being set up. So what we have for the most part are inspections, and then we just are having a difficult, I mean, look, there are individuals, I've said this, I took an oath to uphold the law. Right? I think it's odd we give people a license to commit a federal felony, but that's fine. I took an oath to uphold Oklahoma's law, and we're in charge of that. There are individuals that are trying to, that sincerely believe in that. That's the law. They want to produce those marijuana products, have it tested, and complied with all the law. That's just not the world we have, and so we can inspect, but again, the records are kind of not been in error. We're left with administrative violations, and we're just overwhelmed. That's just kind of where that is. So I will tell you, edibles are very popular. In the poison control, I was on the Marijuana Advisory Council as a group of poison control.
Okay, wait, you said something there I'm curious about.
Okay.
Systems can show plant movement within the facility, though.
Talk about the system in Oklahoma?
Well, I'm just saying that, I mean, it's very much available, and that's what's used in a lot of states. I mean, granted, Oklahoma, like I said, had no guardrails put in place because it was done by referendum.
Yeah, well, we followed up with the bill. It was initially called the Unity Bill, called the Patient Protection Act. That's been in place, I believe, 4 years now. Again, those are rules, they're just not following them. The seed to sale tracking system, and I know that's what we call it there, is a way to track everything. That has just not, that has had no impact whatsoever in the black market. I mean, I know on paper it's there, but, and that's been promoted as a way, but it's just not had an impact.
Senator
Okay,
Clues?
very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Clues.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and this question will be for Joe. Is it McGuire? You were sharing in your testimony, if you could expound a little bit, the piece on the small businesses, workman's comp, brings some question. How many states, you said several states had changed their laws, making it discriminatory for to ask employees. Have you seen any pattern where that has drifted to other narcotics, or could you just speak to that a little bit more? Thank you.
You know, one of the challenges that we have faced since 2013, and this actually was the year this began, prior to 2013, we were tracking state workers' compensation statistics to show how many accidents and injuries happened per drug. So we could see them laid out for alcohol use and by each drug. And then in 2013, it was deemed, and I don't know by whom, but I think at the Department of Labor or OSHA level, federal level, that tracking those statistics are discriminatory. And now they're not attached to any person or individual, so I don't know who we were discriminating against, but we no longer can go to our state database and look up accidents and injuries per drug, which we used to be able to do. So in that regard, one of the things that we've had to look at is the Quest Diagnostics Drug Test Index on the volume of post-accident testing, but we can no longer break it down specifically by drugs because no state, to my knowledge, is continuing to track that in their State Department of Labor. It used to be at the State Department of Labor level, and then it would reflect out in the NASDA report, which is National Survey of Drug Use and Health under SAMHSA, and we could see it really clearly. So that's why we're just referring back to Quest Diagnostics because the data just stopped being tracked. Now, I do believe that our workers' compensation insurance providers could potentially tell us this information, but right now that's protected for their, for their clients. And also post-accident testing for employers is optional. There's nothing that mandates that outside of DOT, nothing. So it is information that is very, very hard to come by these days, and it's sad that we are not doing due diligence to to track this data in light of the way that we're changing laws. So I wish I had something more specific.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So basically, by what you're saying, then, it would be next to impossible to know whether or not there's been like a pattern or drifting towards other narcotics and some of these issues.
Well, what we do see according to the Quest data, and let me just also add, Abbott Laboratories, LabCorp, all of the other major workplace drug testing laboratories say that their data is identical to the Quest data. But the Quest data shows us that increases year over year in amphetamines, cocaine, opioids. We did have a slight decrease in post-accident opioids last year, which was weird post-COVID, but we saw increases in other drugs like cocaine and methamphetamines that we'd never seen before post-accident. In fact, I believe cocaine post-accidents were over triple-digit increases. So that's the best data I can tell you to go look at, and the link is in my submitted report.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One last question I just had, either from Mr. Sherber or Mr. Quigley, regarding fentanyl, and what, particularly probably in Oklahoma, what kind of increase have you seen that's coincident with the increase in the black market and the fentanyl issues?
Well, much like most of the country, we're experiencing a sharp rise in fentanyl. With all the work we did on marijuana last year, we had I think a 300% increase in fentanyl seizures. And so how I would tie that to, I'll give you one example, is that what's very popular with is vaping with high schools. And a couple of weeks ago in a community outside of Tulsa, there were 8 overdoses, and they were trying to smoke a THC vape. And right now, it was field tested hot for heroin. They all responded to Narcan. That those vapes are at the lab. They all had to go to the hospital in doing this. And so I can tell you that what the cartels are doing is they're lacing even methamphetamine with fentanyl. You say, why would you lace a stimulant with a depressant? Reason being, they want to actually, it's very addictive to get them addicted. And we've seen that even with the THC vapes. And so, I mean, look, the data's out there. That's not my, but I've read it on the cannabis use disorder leading to opiate use disorder, and even when it's been accounted for identical twins, same DNA compared to fraternal twins in the same household. That data's out there. Really, there's no debate among addictionologists of it being a gateway drug and leading to other use in doing this. But we've seen that just the use rates go up, and then the cartels are trying to find ways to get more people to use fentanyl, and the more they use marijuana, and we've seen that recently.
Okay. Committee, we are out of time for today. I appreciate all our conferees coming. We will continue this informational briefing tomorrow with more conferees. We appreciate it very much, and we are adjourned. Thank you.